Hello, scholars, and welcome back to the Beanette Book Club. I'm your host, Ellie Beanette, and we are going to be continuing reading Anabasis. This is the English translation of the 370 BC book written by Xenophon, which is really a kind of dramatized historical account of the March of the 10,000. So you can hear a little bit more about that in the intro to the first video, or it's pretty Googleable, pretty good to read up on if you're interested in this kind of thing. Also recommend picking up a copy at your local indie bookstore or library. Love a library. All right. As you can see from my background, I actually have moved, which is why we had such a delay between beginning this channel and then this second video here. I've also swapped to doing the video format rather than the streaming format. I feel like it works a little bit better for this narrative style where I'm just sitting here reading a book, not really able to look at chat and interact with anyone in real time. So I feel like the video format is going to suit this a little bit better. Now, if you do like live streams, you can always head over to Low Art Lyceum YouTube channel, which will be linked in the description, where I play video games and talk about them too with my good friends DJ and Ray. So if you're the kind of person who likes kind of literary analysis of video games and gaming live streams, it's kind of a match made in heaven for you. Now, last week we got through the first 5 chapters of part 1, and so we're going to be picking up with chapter 6. And in chapter 5, the different armies, they were all starting to have some tension and fighting. There was a near fight breakout that happened between 2 of the different factions. Cyrus comes riding in on his horse, stops that shit in its tracks, and gets them to settle down, get along, kids share on the playground. But it's really showing that tensions are rising, and Cyrus is really the only person who's keeping everything from blowing up on this campaign. Everyone collectively believes in Cyrus as being the next king, but they all have their own different reasons for it and are kind of vying for his good graces. And if something were to happen to Cyrus, those alliances will fall apart. So this is where we're picking up. Chapter 6. As usual, please forgive if my mispronunciation of any names. I am a native English speaker, and even though I took a little bit of Koine Greek way back in high school, I'm not fluent by any means. So I'm doing my best. And enjoy. As they advanced from this point, opposite Charmand, they came upon the hoofprints and dung of horses at frequent intervals. It looked like the trail of some 2,000 horses. Keeping ahead of the army, these fellows burnt up the grass and everything else that was good for use. Now, there was a Persian named Orontes. He was closely related to the king by birth, and, in matters pertaining to war, reckoned among the best of Persian warriors. Having formerly been at war with Cyrus, and afterwards he reconciled to him, he now made a conspiracy to destroy him. He made a proposal to Cyrus. If Cyrus would furnish him with 1,000 horsemen, he would deal with those troopers, who were burning down everything in front of them. He would lay an ambuscade and cut them down, or he would capture a host of them alive. In any case, he would put a stop to their aggressiveness and burnings. He would see to it that they did not ever get a chance of setting eyes on Cyrus' army and reporting its advent to the king. The proposal seemed plausible to Cyrus, who accordingly authorized Orontes to take a detachment from each of the generals and be gone. He, thinking that he had gotten his horsemen ready to his hand, wrote a letter to the king announcing that he would ere long join him with as many troopers as he could bring. He bade him, at the same time, instruct the royal cavalry to welcome him as a friend. The letter further contained certain reminders of his former friendship and fidelity. This dispatch he delivered into the hands of one who was a trusty messenger, as he thought, but the bearer took and gave it to Cyrus. Cyrus read it. Orontes was arrested. Then Cyrus summoned his tent of 7 of the noblest Persians among his personal attendants, and sent orders to the Hellenic generals to bring up a body of hoplites. These troops were to take up position round his tent. This the generals did, bringing up about 3,000 hoplites. Clericus was also invited inside to assist at the court-martial. a compliment due to the position held among the other generals. In the opinion not only of Cyrus, but also of the rest of the court. He came out, he reported the circumstances of the trial, as to which, indeed, there was no mystery, to his friends. He said that Cyrus opened the inquiry with the words, "I have invited you hither, my friends, that I may take advice with you, and carry out whatever in the sight of God and man it is right for me to do, as concerning the man before you, Orontes. The prisoner was, in first instance, given to me by my father, to be my faithful subject. In the next place, acting to use his own words under the orders of my brother, and having hold of the Acropolis of Sardis, he went to war with me. I met war with war, and forced him to think it more prudent to desist from war with me, whereupon he shook hands, exchanging solemn pledges. After that," at this point Cyrus turned to Orontes and addressed him personally, "after that, did I do you any wrong?" Answer, "Never." Again another question. "Then later on, having received, as you admit, no injury from me, did you revolt to the Mysians and injure my territory as far in as you lay?" "I did," was the reply. "Then once more, having discovered the limits of your power, did you flee to the altar of Artemis, crying out that you repented? And did you thus work upon my feelings that we a second time shook hands and made interchange of solemn pledges? Are these things so?" Orontes again assented. "Then what injury have you received from me?" Cyrus asked, "that now, for the third time, you have been detected in treasonous plot against me?" "I must needs do so," he answered. Then Cyrus put one more question. "But the day may come, may it not, when you will once again be hostile to my brother and faithful, a friend to myself?" The other answered, "Even if I were, you could never be brought to believe it, Cyrus." At this point, Cyrus turned to those who were present and said, "Such has been the conduct of the prisoner in the past, such is his language now. I now call upon you, and you first, Clericus, to declare your opinion. What think you?" And Clericus answered, "My advice to you is to put this man out of the way as soon as may be, so that we may be saved the necessity of watching him, and have more leisure, as far as he is concerned, to requite the services of those whose friendship is sincere." To this opinion, he told us, the rest of the court adhered. After that, at the bidding of Cyrus, each of those present in turn, including the kinsman of Orontes, took him by the girdle, which is as much as to say, "Let him die the death." And then those appointed let him out. And they who in the old days were wont to do obeisance to him could not refrain, even at that moment, from bowing down before him, albeit they knew he was being led forth to death. After they had conducted him to the tent of Artapates, the trustiest of Cyrus' wand-bearers, none set eyes upon him ever again, alive or dead. No one of his own knowledge could declare the manner of his death, though some conjectured one thing and some another. No tomb to mark his resting place, either then or since, was ever seen. Chapter 7. From this place Cyrus marched through Babylonia 3 stages, 12 parasangs. Now on the 3rd stage, about midnight, Cyrus held a review of Hellenes and the Asiatics in the plain, expecting that the king would arrive the following day with his army to offer battle. He gave orders to Clericus to take command of the right wing, and Menon the Thessalian of the left, while he himself undertook the disposition of his own forces in person. After the review, with the first approach of day, deserters from the great king arrived, bringing Cyrus information about the royal army. Then Cyrus summoned the generals and captains of the Hellenes, and held council of war to arrange the plan of battle. He took this opportunity also to address the following words of compliment and encouragement to the meeting. "Men of Hellas," he said, "it is certainly not from dearth of barbarians to fight my battles that I put myself at your head as my allies, but because I hold you to be better and stronger than many barbarians. That is why I took you. See then that you prove yourselves to be men worthy of the liberty which you possess, and which I envy you. Liberty is a thing which, be well assured, I would choose in preference to all my other possessions, multiplied many times. But I would like you to know into what sort of struggle you are going. Learn its nature from one who knows. Their numbers are great, and they come on with much noise, but if you can hold out against these two things, I confess I am ashamed to think what a sorry set of folk you will find the inhabitants of this land to be. But you are men, and brave you must be. Being men, it is agreed. Then, if you wish to return home, any of you, I undertake to send you back in such sort as your friends at home shall envy you. But I flatter myself I shall persuade many of you to accept what I offer you here in lieu of what you left at home." Here, Gauletes, a Samian exile, and a trusty friend of Cyrus, being present, exclaimed, "Aye, Cyrus, but some say you can afford to make large promises now, but you are in crisis of impending danger. But let matters go well with you. Will you recollect?" They shake their heads. Indeed, some add that even if you did recollect, and ever were so willing, you would not be able to make good all your promises and repay. When Cyrus heard that, he answered, "You forget, sirs, my father's empire stretches southward to a region where men cannot dwell by reason of heat, and northwards to a region uninhabitable through cold. But as the intervening space is mapped out in the stratopes belonging to my brother's friends, so that if victories be ours, it will be ours also to put our friends in possession in their room. On the whole, my fear is not that I may not have enough to give each of my friends, but lest I may not have friends enough on whom to bestow what I have to give. And each of you, Hellenes, I will give you a crown of gold." So they, when they heard these words, were once more elated than ever themselves, and spread the good news among the rest outside. And there came into his presence both generals and some of the other Hellenes, also claiming to know what they should have in the event of victory. And Cyrus satisfied the expectations of each and all, and so dismissed them. Now the advice and admonition of all who came into conversation with him was, not to enter the battle himself, but to post himself in the rear of themselves, and at this season Clericus put a question to him. "But do you think your brother will give battle to you, Cyrus?" And Cyrus answered, "Not without a battle, be assured, shall the prize be won. If he be the son of Darius and Parysatis, and a brother of mine." In the final arming for battle at this juncture, the numbers were as follows. Of the Hellenes, there were 10,400 heavy infantry, with 2,500 targeteers, while the barbarians with Cyrus reached a total of 100,000. He had, too, about 20 scythe chariots. The enemy's forces were reported to number 1,200,000, and 200 scythe chariots, besides which he had 6,000 cavalry under Artaxerxes. These formed the immediate vanguard of the king himself. The royal army was marshaled by 4 generals, or field marshals, each in command of 300,000 men. Their names were Abracomus, Tissaphernes, Gobryas, and Arbaces. But this total, not more than 900,000 were engaged in the battle, with 150 scythe chariots, since Abracomus, on his march from Phoenicia, arrived 5 days late for the battle. Such was the information brought to Cyrus by deserters who came from the king's army before the battle, and it was corroborated after the battle by those of the enemy who were taken prisoners. From this place Cyrus advanced 1 stage 3 parasangs with the whole body of his troops, Hellenic and barbarian alike, in order of battle. He expected the king to give battle the same way, for in the middle of the day's march a deep-sunk trench was reached, 30 feet broad and 18 feet deep. The trench was carried inland through the plain, 12 parasangs distance to the wall of Medea. Here are canals flowing from the river Tigris. They are 4 in number, each 100 feet broad, and very deep. With corn ships plying upon them, they empty themselves into the Euphrates, and are at intervals of 1 parasang apart, and are spanned by bridges. Between the Euphrates and the trench was a narrow passage, 20 feet only in breadth. The trench itself had been constructed by the great king upon hearing of Cyrus' approach, to serve as a line of defense. Through this narrow passage then Cyrus and his army passed, and found themselves safe inside the trench. So there was no battle to be fought with the king that day, only there were numerous unmistakable traces of horse and infantry in retreat. Here Cyrus summoned Silanus, his Ambraciot soothsayer, and presented him with 3,000 darics, because 11 days back, when sacrificing, he had told them that the king would not fight within 10 days, and Cyrus had answered, "Well then, if he does not fight within that time, he will not fight at all, and if your prophecy comes true, I promise you 10 talents. So now that the 10 days were past, he presented him with the above sum. But as the king had failed to hinder the passage of Cyrus' army at the trench, Cyrus himself and the rest concluded they must have abandoned the idea of offering battle. So the next day, Cyrus advanced with less than his former caution. On the 3rd day he was conducting the march seated in his carriage, with only a small body of troops drawn up in front of him. The mass of the army was moving on in no kind of order, the soldiers having consigned their heavy arms to be carried in wagons or on the backs of beasts. Chapter 8. It was already about full market time, and the halting place at which the army was to take up quarters was nearly reached, when Pataginus, a Persian, a trusted member of Cyrus' personal staff, came galloping up at full speed upon his horse, which was bathed in sweat, and to everyone he met he shouted in Greek and Persian as fast as he could ejaculate the words, "The king is advancing with a large army ready for battle!" Then ensued a scene of wild confusion. The Hellenes and alike were all expecting to be attacked on the instant, and before they could form their lines, Cyrus sprang up from his carriage and donned his corselet, and leaping to his charger's back with the javelins firmly clutched, he passed the orders to the rest to arm themselves and fall into their several ranks. The orders were carried out with alacrity. The ranks shaped out themselves. Clericus held the right wing, resting on the Euphrates. Proxenius was next, and after him the rest, while Menon and his troops held the Hellenic left. Of the Asiatics, a body of Paphlagonian cavalry, 1,000 strong, was posted beside Clericus on the right, and with them stood the Hellenic peltats. On the left was Ariaeus, Cyrus' second in command, and the rest of the barbarian host. Cyrus was with his bodyguard of cavalry, about 600 strong, all armed with corselets like Cyrus, and cuirasses and helmets. But not so Cyrus. He went into battle with head unhelmeted. So, too, all the horses with Cyrus wore forehead pieces and breast pieces, and the troopers carried short Hellenic swords. It was now midday, and the enemy was not yet in sight, but with the approach of afternoon was seen dust like white clouds, and after considerable interval, a black pall, as it were, spread far and high above the plain. As they came nearer, very soon was seen here and there glint of bronze and spear points, and the ranks could plainly be distinguished. On the left were troopers wearing white cuirasses. "That is Tissaphernes in command," they said, and next to these a body of men bearing wicker shields, and next again heavy armed infantry, with long wooden shields reaching to their feet. These were the Egyptians, they said, and then other cavalry, other bowmen, all were in national divisions, each nation marching in densely crowded squares. And along their front was a line of chariots at considerable intervals from one another, the famous scythe chariots, as they were named, having their scythes fitted to the axle trees and stretching out slantwise, while others protruded under the chariot seats facing the ground, so as to cut through all they encountered. The design was to let them dash full speed into the ranks of the Hellenes and cut them through. Curiously enough, the anticipation of Cyrus, when the council of war he admonished the Hellenes not to mind the shouting of the Asiatics, was not justified. Instead of shouting, they came in deep silence, softly and slowly, and with even tread. At this instant, Cyrus, riding past in person, accompanied by Pygris, his interpreter, of three or four others, called out to Clericus to advance against the enemy's center, for there the king was to be found. And if we strike home at this point, he added, our work is finished. Clericus, though he could see the compact body at the center, and had been told by Cyrus that the king lay outside the Hellenic left, for owing to numerical superiority, the king, while holding his own center, could well overlap Cyrus' extreme left, still hesitated to draw off his right wing from the river, for fear of being turned on both flanks. He simply replied, assuring Cyrus that he would take care all went well. At this time the barbarian army was evenly advancing, and the Hellenic division was still riveted to the spot, completing its formation as the various contingents came up. Cyrus, riding past at some distance from the lines, glanced his eye first in one direction and then in another, so as to take a complete survey of his friends and foes. When Xenophon the Athenian, seeing him, rode up from the Hellenic quarter to meet him, asking him whether he had any orders to give, Cyrus, pulling up his horse, begged him to make an announcement generally known that the omens from the victims, internal and external alike, were good. While he was still speaking, he heard a confused murmur passing through the ranks and asked what it meant. The other replied that it was the watchword being passed down for the second time. Cyrus wondered who had given the order, and asked what the watchword was. On being told it was Zeus, our savior in victory, he replied, I accept it, so let it be, and with that remark rode away to his own position. And now the two battle lines were no more than 3 or 4 furlongs apart, when the Hellenes began chanting the paean, and the same time advanced against the enemy. But with the forward movement, a certain portion of the line curved onwards in advance, with wave-like sinuosity, and the portion left behind quickened to a run. Simultaneously a thrilling cry burst from all lips, like that in honor of the war god. Elaleo! Elaleo! And the running became general. Some say they clashed their shields and spears, thereby causing terror to the horses. And before they got within arrow shoot, the barbarians swerved and took flight. And now the Hellenes gave chase with what might and main, checked only by the shouts to one another not to race but to keep their ranks. The enemy's chariots, reft of their charioteers, swept onward, some through the enemies themselves, others past the Hellenes. They, as they saw them coming, opened a gap and let them pass. One fellow, like some dumbfounded mortal on a race course, was caught by the heels, but even he, they said, received no hurt, nor indeed, with a single exception of someone on the left wing, who was said to have been wounded by an arrow, did any Hellene in this battle suffer a single hurt. Cyrus, seeing the Hellene conquering, as far as they at any rate were concerned, and in hot pursuit, was well content. But in spite of his joy and the salutations offered him at that moment by those around him as though he were already king, he was not led away to join the pursuit, but keeping his squadron of 600 horsemen in close order, waited and watched to see what the king himself would do. The king, he knew, held the center of the Persian army. Indeed, it is the fashion for the Asiatic monarch to occupy that position during action, for this twofold reason. he holds the safest place, with his troops on either side of him, while, if he has occasion to dispatch any necessary riders among the lines, his troops receive the message in half the time. The king, accordingly, on this occasion held the center of his army, but for all that, he was outside Cyrus' left wing, and seeing that no one offered him battle in the front, nor yet the troops in front of him, he wheeled as if to encircle the enemy. It was then that Cyrus, in apprehension lest the king might get round to the rear and cut to pieces the Hellenic body, charged to meet him. Attacking with his 600, he mastered the line of troops in front of the king and put to flight the 6,000, cutting down, as it said, with his own hand their general, Artaxerxes. But as soon as the rout commenced, Cyrus' own 600 themselves, in an ardor of pursuit, were scattered, with the exception of a handful who were left with Cyrus himself, chiefly his table companions so called. Left alone with these, he caught sight of the king, the close throng about him. Unable longer to contain himself, with a cry, "I see the man!" he rushed at him and dealt a blow to his chest, wounding him through his corselet. This, according to the statement of Ctesias the surgeon, who further states that he himself healed the wound. As Cyrus delivered the blow, someone struck him with a javelin under the eye severely, and in the struggle which then ensued between the king and Cyrus and those about them to protect one or the other, we have the statement of Ctesias as to the number slain on the king's side, for he was by his side. On the other, Cyrus himself fell, and 8 of his bravest companions lay on top of him. The story says that Artapes, the truest among his wand-wearers, where he saw that Cyrus had fallen to the ground, leapt from his horse and threw his arms about him. Then, as one account says, the king bade one slay him as a worthy victim to his brother. Others say that Artapes drew his scimitar and slew himself by his own hand. A gold scimitar, it is true, he had. He wore also a collar and bracelets and other ornaments, as the noblest of Persians wear, for his kindliness and fidelity had won him honors at the hand of Cyrus. So, we're going to take a moment and mention that, remembering what we talked about previously, that Cyrus was the only thing holding these troops together, their agreement that he should be king. We're this far into the book. Cyrus just died. Things are going to get messy. Chapter 9. So died Cyrus, a man the kingliest, and most worthy to rule all the Persians who had lived since the elder Cyrus, according to the concurrent testimony of all who were reputed to have known him intimately. To begin from the beginning, when still a boy and whilst being brought up with his brother and the other lads, his unrivaled excellence was recognized. For the sons of the noblest Persians, it must be known, are brought up, one and all, at the king's portals. Here lessons of sobriety and self-control may largely be laid to heart, while there is nothing base or ugly for the eye or ear to feed upon. There is a daily spectacle ever before the boys of some receiving honor from the king, and again of others receiving dishonor, and the tale of all this in their ears, so that from the earliest boyhood they learn how to rule and to be ruled. In this courtly training Cyrus earned a double reputation. First, he was held to be a paragon of modesty among his fellows, rendering an obedience to his elders which exceeded that of many of his own inferiors. And next, he bore away the palm for skill in horsemanship and love for the animal itself. Nor less matters of war, in the use of the bow and the javelin, which he held by men in general to be at once the aptest of learners and the most eager practiser. As soon as his age permitted, the same preeminence showed itself in his fondness for the chase, not without certain appetite for perilous adventure in facing the wild beasts themselves. Once a bear made a furious rush at him, and without wincing he grappled with her and was pulled from his horse, receiving wounds the scars of which were visible through life. But in the end he slew the creature, nor did he forget him who first came to his aid, but made him enviable in the eyes of many. There is a note here after the bear saying that the elder Cyrus, when a boy, kills not a bear, but a boar. After he had been sent down by his father to be satrap of Lydia and the great Phrygia and Cappadocia, and had been appointed general of the forces whose business it is to muster up the plains of Castolas, nothing was more noticeable in his conduct than the importance which he attached to the faithful fulfillment of every treaty or compact or undertaking entered into with others. He would tell no lie to anyone. Thus doubtless it was that he won the confidence alike of individuals and of the communities entrusted to his care, or in the case of hostility, a treaty made with Cyrus was a guarantee sufficient to the combatant that he would suffer nothing contrary to its terms. Therefore, in war with Tissaphernes, all the states of their own accord chose Cyrus in lieu of Tissaphernes, except only the men of Miletus. And they were only alienated through fear of him, because he refused to abandon their exiled citizens. And his deeds and words bore emphatic witness to his principle. Even if they were weakened in number or in fortune, he would never abandon those who had once become his friends. He made no secret of his endeavor to outdo his friends and his foes alike in reciprocity of conduct. The prayer has been attributed to him, "God grant I may live long enough to recompense my friends and requite my foes with a strong arm." However, this may be, no one, at least in our days, ever drew together so ardent a following of friends, eager to lay at his feet their money, their cities, their own lives and persons. Nor is it to be inferred from this that he suffered the malefactor and the wrongdoer to laugh at him to scorn. On the contrary, these he punished most unflinchingly. It was no rare sight to see on the well-trodden highways men who had forfeited hand or foot or eye. The result being provided he were innocent, might fearlessly travel wherever he pleased, and take with him whatever he felt disposed. However, as all allowed it was for the brave in war he reserved episcopal honor. To take the first instance to hand, he had a war with Pisidians and Mysians. Being himself at the head of an expedition to those territories, he could observe those who voluntarily encountered risk. These he had made rulers of the territory, which he subjected, and afterwards honored them with other gifts, so that, if the good and brave were set on a pinnacle of fortune, cowards were recognized as their natural slaves, and so it befell that Cyrus had never lacked volunteers in any service of danger, whatever it was expected that his eye would be upon him. So again, wherever he might discover any one ready to distinguish themselves in the service of uprightness, his delight was to make this man richer than those who would seek to gain by unfair means. On the same principle, his own administration was in all respects uprightly conducted, and in particular, he secured the services of an army worthy of the name. Generals and subalterns alike came to him from across the sea not merely to make money, but because they saw that loyalty to Cyrus was more profitable investment than so many pounds a month. Let any man whatsoever render him willing service, such enthusiasm was sure to win its reward, and so Cyrus could always command the service of the best assistants, it was said, whatever the work might be. Or, if he saw any skillful and just steward who furnished well the country over which he ruled, he created revenues, so far from robbing him at any time to him who he delighted to give more, so that the toil was a pleasure and gains were amassed with confidence. Least of all from Cyrus would a man conceal the amount of his possessions, seeing that he showed no jealousy of wealth openly avowed, but his endeavor was rather to turn to account the riches of those who kept them in secret. Towards the friends he had made, whose kindliness he knew, or whose fitness as fellow workers with himself is aught which he might wish to carry out, he had tested, he showed himself in turn as an adept in the arts of courtesy. Just in proportion he felt the need of this friend or that to help him, he also tried to help each of them in return in whatever seemed to be their heart's desire. Many were gifts bestowed on him. For many and diverse reasons, not one man, perhaps, ever received more. No one certainly was ever more ready to bestow them upon others, with an eye ever to the tastes of each, so as to gratify what he saw to be the individual requirements. Many of these presents were sent to him to serve as personal adornments of the body, or for battle, as touching as he would say, "How am I to deck myself out in all these? To my mind, a man's chief ornament is the adornment of nobly adorned friends." Indeed, that he should triumph over his friends in great matters of well-doing is not surprising, seeing that he was much more powerful than they, but that he should go beyond them in minute attentions, and eager to desire to give pleasure, seems to me, I must confess, more admirable. Frequently, when he had tasted some specifically excellent wine, he would send half the remaining flagon to some friends, with a message to say, "Cyrus says this is the best wine he has tasted for a long time. That is his excuse for sending it to you. He hopes you will drink it up today with a choice of party of friends." Or perhaps he would send a reminder of a dish of geese, half loaves of bread, and so forth, the bearer being instructed to say, "This is Cyrus' favorite dish. He hopes you will taste it yourself." Or perhaps there was a great dearth of provender, when, through the numbers of his servants and his own careful forethought, he was unable to get supplies for himself. At such times he would send to his friends in different parts, bidding them feed their horses on his hay, since it would not do for the horses that carried his friends to go starving. Then, on any long march or expedition where the crowd of lookers-on would be large, he would call his friends to him and entertain them with serious talk, as much as to say, "These I delight to honor." So that, for myself, and from all that I can hear, I should be disposed to say that no one, Greek or barbarian, was ever so beloved. In proof of this, I may cite the fact that, though Cyrus was the king's vassal and slave, no one ever forsook him to join his master, if I may except the attempt of Orontes, which was abortive. That man, indeed, had learned that Cyrus was closer to the heart of him on whose fidelity he relied than he himself was. On the other hand, many a man revolted from the king to Cyrus, after they went to war with one another, nor were these nobodies, but rather persons high in the king's affection. Yet for all that they believed that their virtues would obtain a reward more adequate from Cyrus than from the king. Another great proof at once of his own worth and his capacity rightly to discern all loyal, loving, and firm friendship is afforded by an incident which belongs to the last moment of his life. He was slain, but fighting for his life beside him fell also every one of his faithful bodyguard of friends and table companions, with the sole exception of Ariaeus, who was in command of the cavalry on the left, and he no sooner perceived the fall of Cyrus than he betook himself to flight, with his whole body of troops under his lead. Chapter 10. Then the head of Cyrus and his right hand were severed from the body. But the king and those about him pursued and fell upon the Syrian camp, and the troops of Ariaeus no longer stood their ground, but fled through their own camp and back to the halting place of the night before, a distance of 4 parasangs, it was said. So the king and those with him fell to ravaging right and left. Among other spoil he captured the Phoenician woman who was the concubine of Cyrus, witty and beautiful, if fame speaks correctly. The Milesian, who was the younger, also seized by some of the king's men, but letting go her outer garment, she made good her escape to the Hellenists, who had been left among the camp followers on guard. These fell at once into line, and put to the sword many of the pillagers. Though they lost some men themselves, they stuck to the place and succeeded in saving not only that lady, but all else, whether chattel or human beings, which lay within their reach. At this point, the king and the Hellenists were something like 3 miles apart. The one set were pursuing their opponents just as if their conquest had already been general. The others were pillaging as merrily as if their victory were already universal. But when the Hellenists learned that the king and his troops were in the baggage camp, then the king, on his side, was informed by Tissaphernes that the Hellenes were victorious in their quarter of the field and had gone forward in pursuit. The effect was instantaneous. The king massed his troops and formed into a line. Clericus summoned Proxenius, who was next to him, and debated whether to send a detachment or go in a body to the camp to save it. Meanwhile, the king was seen again advancing, as it seemed, from the rear, and the Hellenists turning right about, prepared to receive his attack then and there. But instead of advancing upon them at that point, he drew off, following the line by which he had passed earlier in the day, outside the left wing of his opponent, and so picked up in his passage those who had deserted the Hellenists during the battle, as also Tissaphernes and his division. The latter had not fled in the first shock of the encounter. He had charged parallel to the line of the Euphrates into the Greek peltasts, and through them. But charge as he might, he did not lay low a single man. On the contrary, the Hellenists made a gap to let them through, hacking them with their swords and hurling their javelins as they passed. Episthanes of Amphipolis was in the command of the peltats, as he showed himself a sensible man, it was said. Thus it was that Tissaphernes, having gotten through haphazard, was rather the worst of it, failed to wheel round and return the way he came, but reaching the camp of the Hellenes there fell in with the king, and falling into order again, the two divisions advanced, side by side. When they were parallel with the original, left wing of the Hellenes, fear seized the latter, lest they might take them in flank and enfold them on both sides and cut them down. In this apprehension they determined to extend their line and place the river to their rear. But while they deliberated, the king passed by and ranged his troops in line to meet them, in exactly the same position which he had advanced to offer battle at the commencement of the engagement. The Hellenists, now seeing them in close proximity and in battle order, once again raised the paean and began to attack with still greater enthusiasm than before. And once again the barbarians did not wait to receive them, but took flight, even at greater distance than before. The Hellenists pressed the pursuit until they reached a certain village, where they halted, for above the village rose a mound on which the king and his party rallied and reformed. They had no infantry any longer, but the crest was crowded with cavalry, and so it was impossible to discover what was happening. They did see, they said, the royal standard, a kind of golden eagle with wings extended, perched on a bar of wood, and raised upon a lance. But as soon as the Hellenes again moved onwards, the hostile cavalry at once left the hillock, not in a body any longer, but in fragments, some streaming in from one side, some from another, and the crest was gradually stripped of its occupants till at last the company was gone. Accordingly, Clericus did not ascend the crest, but posting his army at the base, he sent Lysias of Syracuse and another to the summit with orders to inspect the condition of things on the other side and to report results. Lysias galloped and investigated, bringing back news that they were fleeing might and main. Almost at that instant the sun sank beneath the horizon. There the Hellenes halted. They grounded arms and rested, marveling that while Cyrus was not anywhere to be seen, and no messenger had come from him, for they were in complete ignorance of his death, and conjecture that he had either gone off in pursuit or had pushed forward to occupy some point. Left to themselves, they now deliberated whether they should stay where they were and have the baggage train brought up, or should return to camp. They resolved to return, and about supper time reached the tents. Such was the conclusion of this day. They found the larger portion of their property pillaged, edibles and drinkables alike, not excepting the wagons laden with corn and wine which Cyrus had prepared in case of some extreme need overtaking the expedition, to divide among the Hellenes. There were 400 of these wagons, it was said, and these had now been ransacked by the king and his men. so that the greater number of the Hellenes went supperless, having already gone without their breakfast, since the king had appeared before the usual halt for breakfast. Accordingly, in no better plight than this, they passed the night. And that is the end of Book 1. So that's where we're going to end it for today. And next time we will begin Book 2, which is where we're going to start with what the armies are going to do in the wake of Cyrus' death. Cyrus was holding it together, and now Cyrus is gone. And after Cyrus' death, they really already have kind of begun to fall apart. The king's armies overtook them, and now it's a matter of a long, treacherous retreat. They are without food, they are without their commander, and they are without the unity that previously brought all of those factions together. So, in for a bit of a treacherous journey. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining me for Miss Beanette's Book Club and reading Anabasis. And as always, you can join me over on the Lower Art Lyceum channel for video game live streams on generally Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. We do change a bit week to week depending on our work schedules, but you can find us over there. We are currently playing The Warriors, which is actually what tied in with this choice of book. So this is the book that actually inspired this book, which then inspired the 1970s film, which then got adapted into the 2005, I believe, video game that we are playing over on Lower Lyceum. The film and the game actually take more inspiration from Anabasis than this actual book. This book is more of a sort of narrative. In a lot of ways, it's kind of a narrative opinion think piece on the state of gang violence in 1970s New York City. Actually, I think this was 1960s. 1950s. All right. Though it does take inspiration from Anabasis for the general plot points, which then inspired the 1970s film, which took more inspiration thematically from Anabasis on the concepts of loyalty, unity, a figurehead that could bring different factions together, what happens when that falls apart, and really what it means to be somebody who inspires that kind of loyalty. The movie is more about camaraderie and family, versus this book is more about the harsh realities of gang violence in the 1950s New York. So they all have their strengths and weaknesses. I think when looked at together, it provides a really interesting picture of the way that stories shape each other over time and the importance of reading literature outside of your time and place. But with that, we're going to wrap it up for today. So thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Stay scholarly, stay reading, stay curious.